very bad at this. Okay. So now we'll have the pleasure to listen to Maciej Sendłak on Metaontology of dependence.
Right. So as you can see, the subject of my talk is the notion of dependence. And the aim of it is to find out what, if anything at all, is common among different types of dependence relations. So in this sense, well, what I will try to do is to develop some kind of metaontological account of dependence, or yeah, let's call it that way. And the schedule for the talk is quite simple. So I will begin with saying a few words about explanation, because I think that dependence relation has a great importance for the explanation. Then I will move to the key subject, that is the dependence relation. And finally, I will say a few words about the consequences of the view that I'm going to propose, and these will mostly be consequences for the debate over explanation. So to begin with, many like to claim that to explain a given phenomenon is just to answer the question of why this phenomenon occurred in the first place. So if you want to explain the fact that Adam ate the apple, all you have to do is just to provide an answer to the question, right? And well, to this we can answer a number of ways. So we could say that, well, Adam ate the apple because he's a vegan, or because this is the only fruit that he's not allergic to, or because he was hungry. And obviously, these are quite different answers. Nevertheless, since all of them are true, and let's assume that all of them are true, and each of them also justify the topic of this question, then, well, it's quite fair to say that each of them can be an explanation of the fact that Adam ate the apple. And the fact that we can have such a different answers is, well, it might seem to be quite controversial, but at the same time, some like to claim that it does justice to the fact that explanations are quite complex and context sensitivity. So in this sense, it's perfectly fine to have more than one good answer to a given question, depending on the context of the context that we are interested in. Nevertheless, some also like to claim that this quite liberal approach toward explanation has some drawbacks. And one of them is that, in this sense, we could say that Adam ate the apple because he's a Virgo. And in this sense, well, horoscopes would have some kind of explanatory power. And weird as it might seem, I came across this website, the fruit you should eat based on your zodiac sign. And if you're a Virgo, you should eat apples. So now you know. So in this sense, obviously, well, there are good reasons to not consider horoscopes as something that has any explanatory power whatsoever. So in this sense, it would be nice to draw a distinction between those answers which are good answers and those answers that should be considered to be explanations. So this takes us to the second question, which is the question, under what condition an answer to the question provides an explanation, right? Because as we see, not all of them should be considered to be explanations. And well, several people address this in a number of different ways. So for instance, we could say that the answer should be based on the deduction of a law as one of premises, as Hempel famously claimed. Others like to claim that the answer should allow us to understand the phenomenon, as Friedman and lately Direct and Dix argued. Still others would like to say that the answer should be the element of the unified picture of data, as Philip Kitcher argued. Now, obviously, they differ. There are quite different answers. Nevertheless, there is something that they all have in common. And what they all have in common is the claim that explanation is a matter of the shape and organization of one's belief system, not of its content. In other words, here we are more interested in agents' beliefs, so to speak, than what is going on in the world outside our minds, so to speak. And for that reason, some label this internalism or anti-realism about explanation. And if there is internalist approach, surely there is also externalist approach. And according to externalists, explanation tracks dependence relations, meaning that the relation that grounds the relation between an explanans G and its explanatory conclusion E is that of dependence. Namely, G is an exponent of E, just in case E, the event being explained, depends on G, the event invoked as explaining it. Why is it so? Well, because by showing an event to be dependent on another, the explanation reduces the number of independent events in the world and also the number of independent assumptions we need to accept about the world. Right, so in this sense, there is this debate between two approaches toward the philosophy of explanation, whereas one of them is internalism, the other one is externalism. And right, and as I said, externalists like to claim that the answer that we should consider to be explanation should indicate the dependence relation between explanandum and explanans. And I already did mention Kim, but this view is also advocated by some other philosophers such as Rubin, Kim, Cohen, and I guess many, many others. So if we, for the sake of the argument, if we accept the externalist approach, this naturally shifts us to the question of what the dependence is in the first place, right? Because apparently we are taking dependence to be extremely important, especially for explanation, so we better have something interesting to say about dependence relation as such. Now, since dependence is a relation, it might be tempting to characterize this or define this in terms of its formal properties. So many like to claim that dependence is transitive, asymmetric, and irreflexive. And well, there are good reasons to believe that, and especially if we consider dependence to be explanatory notion, because genuine explanations are irreflexive and asymmetrical. Nothing can explain itself, and if a first thing explains the second, then it isn't also the case that the second explains the first. Given that determination or dependence is also irreflexive and asymmetrical, it will be no surprise that explanation has these features if one job of explanation is to report underlying relations of determination. Right? So it seems that there are some compelling reasons to think that dependence truly is transitive, asymmetric, and irreflexive. And advocates of externalism often list types of dependence relation that they like to consider explanatory. So here is the list, quite popular list, let's say. So causation, supervenience, mereological dependence, ontological dependence, grounding, obviously. So these are the most popular examples of dependence relation, but I guess we can easily extend it, this list. So truth making seems like a dependence relation as well, right? Where we are saying that the true value of a true barrier depends upon the ontological status of a truth maker. Likewise, probability, especially conditional probability, seems to be dependence relation as well, where we are saying that chance of a given event depends on some other events and so on and so forth. Logical entailment seems to be dependent relation as well, where we are saying that the true value of a given truth barrier depends on true value of some other truth barriers. And I guess that, well, this list surely is not, well, it's not ended yet. I guess there might be some more examples of dependence relation. What they all have in common, at least one thing that they all have in common, is that each of them can be expressed by the use of the term because, meaning that this is the term that we often use to express dependence relation. Nevertheless, it's less obvious that all of them are transitive, asymmetric, and irreflexive, especially when it comes to grounding. I guess that nowadays it's very few possible options that were not yet defended, right? So people argue whether grounding is transitive or asymmetrical or reflexive and so on and so forth. Likewise, in the case of truth making, there are quite similar debates, and especially when it comes to entailment, surely it's not irreflexive, right? So in this sense, well, maybe some dependence relations are they satisfy these three properties, but surely, well, maybe not surely, but I think that it's not true about all of them. So this takes us to the square one, because again, well, it's hard to say what dependence relation is. And I think that one way to learn more about dependence relation is to look closely to one of the popular example of this, which is Humean supervenience, famously developed by Lewis, Loewer, Higgs, Wilson, and many, many others. And well, this is dependence relation, obviously, because it has it that laws of nature supervene on atomic facts. And this can be described, I mean, the view itself can be described in a number of ways, but for my purpose, I will just list 3 assumptions, I guess, which are quite important. So the first one is that the world at its metaphysical base is a vast mosaic of points with intrinsic properties. So we know what the world is built out of. Secondly, the laws summarize these properties, meaning that the laws are general axioms of whichever summary best balances simplicity, strength, and chance. And finally, the same laws can hold in different worlds, right? So that's the essence, let's say, of the Humean supervenience. And well, some people like this view, some don't. But those who like this view often stress that, well, it's extremely elegant up to the point where it can be represented as a simple function. So some like to call this best system account, and here's the function. So we could say that laws of nature are just images of a 3-argument function, such that the first argument is the set of perfectly natural properties. The second argument is the distribution of these within a given world. And the third argument are just standard of goodness that we take into consideration. Right? So in this sense, laws of nature is nothing more than just the image of this simple function. Some also like to claim that even though best system account is a good starting point, somehow is a bit too narrow, in a sense that we might want to be able to talk about laws of nature which are interested in something more than just perfectly natural properties. And they proposed better best system account. And the only difference, well, the main difference between best and better system account is the difference between what counts as the first argument, so to speak. That is, if you're an advocate of a better best system account, you do not have to restrict yourself to perfectly natural properties, but you use some kind of natural properties. So think, for instance, about laws of chemistry or biology and so on and so forth. So in this sense, you could have more laws than just a regular best system account gives. So my idea is to piggyback on that and to try to use this to propose more general picture of dependence relation. And to keep the label schema, and for the lack of better label, I would like to propose superior better best system. So superior better best system account is quite similar as the previous 2. The only difference is that since we think about laws in terms of dependence relations, right? We just said that laws supervene on atomic facts. I would like to extend this picture to cover other types of dependence relations. So now what I would like to say is that dependence relation concerning a given element is nothing more than just the image of a function, which is quite similar to the previous 2, but the only difference is that we don't say much about what the mosaic is built out of, right? So we don't talk about perfect properties or just natural properties. We are just talking about mosaic, whatever it is, right? So let me give you some examples. So this is the regular picture, right, when we are having laws of nature. So as I said, well, we can think about entailment as a dependence relation as well. So let's just paraphrase these 3 assumptions to make them work for entailment. And we could say that the world at logical base is a vast mosaic of propositions and values. The entailment summarizes the mosaic. The laws are general. The laws of logic are general axioms of whichever summary best balances simplicity, strength, and chance. And the same entailment can hold in different worlds. Likewise, we can think about grounding in a similar way by saying that world at its metaphysical base is a vast mosaic of whatever your favorite relate of grounding is. And the grounding just summarize the mosaic, meaning that the laws of grounding are general axioms of whichever summary best balances simplicity, strength, and chance. and obviously the same grounding relations can hold in different worlds. So in general, we could say that, well, the world is a vast mosaic of something, right? Pick your favorite elements of dependence relation. And the dependence relation is just something that gives you the summary of this mosaic, right? And obviously it needs to satisfy the standard of goodness and so on and so forth, right? And obviously the same dependence relation can hold in different worlds. So we can think about, let us assume that this is the set of all worlds, possible and impossible. Then we could say that, well, there is a set of worlds where classical logic holds, and everything outside of the set are logically impossible worlds. There is a set of worlds where a given grounding relation holds, so everything outside this set are worlds which are groundingly impossible, so to speak. Some where given laws of nature hold. Maybe there is also dependence relation which holds in some worlds, but not the actual world. So, for instance, the dependence relation between your zodiac sign and food you should eat, right? And I guess that there might be also the universal dependence relation. Maybe truth making seems to be like a good candidate for such universal dependence relation. Okay, so now let me say a few words about possible consequences of this. So, as I said, this account should be metaontological account of dependence, and I take that metaontological account of X should be the view that allows you to have a better understanding of debates over X, right? So in this sense, I think that the superior better best system account might be a good candidate for such meta-ontological account of dependence, because I think that if you choose your favorite if you choose philosophical debate over your favorite dependence relation, I guess it will be argument over this or that eventually, right? So, for instance, a lot of people argue, today's morning we've heard that it's not so obvious what are elements of causation, right? Whether these are facts or events. So when people argue whether causation holds between facts or events, what they're arguing over is what is the nature of the mosaic, right? So debates over the subject of dependence relations are just debates over the domain of mosaic. So when we're having disagreement over whether dependence relations hold between fact or situation and so on and so forth, we are arguing over what is the nature of mosaic, basically. We often, some of us sometimes argue over formal properties of dependence relation. And I take that these are just arguments over the distribution of elements of mosaic within the world, right? So, so in this sense, the properties that we ascribe to a given dependence relation is nothing more than something that is meant to be the best summary of the distribution of the elements of this mosaic. The last one is, on the one hand, is quite straightforward because I guess, arguments over B are arguments over what we should consider to be data. That is which of the possible dependence relation satisfy the standard of goodness, that is which strike the balance between strength and simplicity. So I guess that maybe debate between logical monists and pluralists are actually debates over B. That is whether monism is strong enough, or maybe we need pluralists to satisfy to explain all data that we want to explain and so on and so forth. So in this sense, it might be quite straightforward, but at the same time, it might be also a bit tricky. And this takes us back to the initial distinction between internalism and externalism, where I said that according to internalists, explanation is a matter of our belief systems, right? So that's what explanation is all about. Whereas according to externalists, explanation is about dependence relations. Now, this is the picture of dependence relation, right? So it seems like it should go to externalists now. Nevertheless, the important aspect of this dependence relation is this third element, that is the balance. And the balance, famously, is kind of a bit bad bag for Humean supervenience, because some like to claim that it's entirely agent relative, right? So in this sense, we put agents' beliefs into the dependence relation in the first place, right? So in this sense, if that's how we might want to think about dependence relation, then this distinction does not work anymore, in a sense that we can think about this distinct. Well, we should add another layer, that is the layer which would tell us what is the dependence relation in the first place. That is, whether this represents dependence relation correctly, accurately, or maybe dependence relation is something that is entirely independent to the agent, right? So in this sense, due to the nature of this third element, some dependence-seeking approaches belong to internalists, because, well, there is this internalist, agent-dependent aspect of dependence relation. And yeah, that's what I wanted to show you. So thank you for your patience.
Okay. Oh boy. Doom, 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 doom.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with the clarificatory question about how similar your account is to the best system accounts. And the best system account, what we get is it's a best system of regularities, which are regularities but co-instantiations of properties. So regularity for Lewis is always something of the form for all x if fx and gx.
Right.
And that is it's co-instantiations of features.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how similar dependence relations really are like that. If you think about causal relations, they're about relations between two different entities, rather than about regularity in instantiations about what's at the same point on the spatial temporal canvas.
Right. So I think that the only difference, well, maybe not the only, but it might be quite important, is that it might be tricky to apply what I've just said to other types of dependence relation. But if there is a problem, there is either a problem because of the problem with Humean supervenience in the first place, or because of the epistemics, right? So I'm not sure how to. It's hard to say what is the epistemology of metaphysics in the first place, right? So in this sense, I might be not sure which description is the best one, and so on and so forth. But then it's kind of a.
My question wasn't all that fancy. Now, Lewis doesn't have a best system account of causation. He has a best system account of laws.
Yeah.
And a law is just a regularity.
Right.
Right. For Lewis, a regularity about co-instantiations of properties.
Right.
And so a lot of people think, well, look, a law is not that, it's not all SIGs, it's philosophical fiction, it's not that, but that's his account about co-instantiation. But he doesn't have a best system account of causation, which is not about co-instantiation of properties, about different events standing in relation to one another.
Right.
I'm just wondering how.
Right. So it would be just to say that, well, when we are thinking about causation, we can think about, we can try to describe this as description of some regularities, right? And then we are having, we witness some regularities, and then we just describe these regularities. Well, we figure out that, it seems like there is a pattern, right? So each time when I throw a break into the window, it shatters, and so on and so forth. So it seems like there is a kind of a regularity, right? So in this sense, it seems to me that, it's just going one step further.
Fabio?
Thanks. I enjoy the way you approach this. And my question is, it seems to me as you move to the superior better best system, it's of course broader, right? More abstract, but also it's less explanatory.
Yeah.
Because in a way you're just giving, this is a range of possibilities. So it doesn't really offer an account, right? What it does is it provides a space of possibility for the various views, right? Doesn't that change significantly, right? What, for example, the best system account was supposed to do?
Yeah, so as I said, it's supposed to be meta-ontological approach, right? Whereas obviously best system account and better best system account are more like metaphysical or ontological approaches, right? So this is just meant to show that, well, it seems like there's a lot of books and papers about this or that types of dependence relation, but it seems like it's really difficult to find one which would be about dependence relation as such, right? So there's a lot of about grounding and causation and so on and so forth, right? But well, it seems that they need to have something in common, what makes them dependence relation in the first place, right? So let's try to find out how can we find this similarity between them or the universal structure between them, right? So in this sense, it's kind of as I said, it doesn't tell you, whether this or that particular grounding relation or your grounding views are correct or incorrect, right? Because that's not the point. Nevertheless, it tells you why your favorite grounding theory is correct, because it strikes the balance between simplicity and strength when it comes to description of your favorite relata, the distribution of them within the world, right, so to speak. So in this sense, I'm not trying to say, whether you should be classical logician or not, and so on and so forth. So that's not my joke here, right? It just, if you argue over one or another type of dependence relation, you most likely argue over one of the elements of this function, I guess.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the talk. So I really like your approach, but there is something that troubles me. So you're always talking about mosaic, so you have like this very Lewisian approach, but at the same time you're talking about grounding relationships, and I really don't think that those two can fit together, because like the grounding relation is usually, that was the question this morning, related to grounding necessitarianism. So you have the grounding base, you have the grounding, and so you have this necessary connection between them. In this case, it seems to me that it is pretty non-human to talk about grounding relation in this case. So it seems to me that talking about mosaic could be complicated, and that's why supervenience is really different from grounding hyper-intentional approaches. So in this case, I think that there is some slight limit in the way you would approach this question of mosaic and hypothesis.
Yeah, right. So to make it even worse, I think that grounding is not I think that logical entailment is even worse in this case, right? Because we want to say that there are necessity relations between them and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, the whole idea is just to say that, well, look, when you're talking about, when you believe that, that might sound weird. Maybe we should turn off mic and camera, but okay. If you would like to justify, let's say, the law of double negation, right? According to this approach, you would have to say that, well, double negation seems to be the most effective way to describe relation between propositions and true values, right? So just because there is a necessity relation between them, or there's necessity between them, it doesn't mean that this does not do justice to this fact. And by the way, that's why I did mention that this is, so the fact that grounding relation is necessary, right? It means that it belongs to one of these sets where we are talking about. Let's say that the red one is all about grounding, right? So everything that the mosaics, that the worlds that belong to the red one have such mosaics that the best description of these mosaics is to say that grounding relations hold within these worlds, right? Makes it necessary. That's what supposed to does justice to the fact that, well, some relations have model notions with them.
Okay, but you cannot just say this could happen in some words and this could just not happen in some words. I mean, for really the vast majority of grounding theorists, if you have the grounding base, you have the grounding. So it's like, it's a necessary connection. It cannot be restricted.
Yeah. That's so. Keep in mind that these are possible and impossible worlds in the broadest sense, right? So blue worlds, let us assume blue worlds are worlds where classical logic holds, right? So this means that these one are worlds where classical logic does not hold, right? Likewise, there are some, classical probability calculus holds in the red worlds, let's say, right? But not in others. Why? Well, because either the mosaic is quite different, or maybe the best description of this mosaic is not the one which requires us to talk about, grounding or probability calculus and so on and so forth, right? So in this sense, it's as broad as it can be. So it goes along what was said in the previous talk about the chaotic worlds and so on and so forth. So everything fits here somewhere.
Okay. Oh, Alistair, someone renounces a
Okay.
question.
Thank you. So, I like the approach. I think it's nice and unifying. I wanted to ask if it has a consequence, though I'm not sure about this, that like each pair of facts or each pair of like elements of the mosaic can only have one of these dependence relations holding between it.
Yeah.
Like we might, I think, perhaps want the same pair of facts be related both by causation and by grounding under certain situations. If we have like necessity of origin going on or something like that. So maybe like the fact that I'm descended, I'm caused to exist by like the first human that I'm descended from, but it's my humanity is also grounded in that. So like that a human exists is both caused and grounded by the first human's activities.
Right.
Right. Is this compatible with that, or does each relation end up only being one out of causation and grounding and so on?
No, I'm quite sympathetic to the first option, partly because, well, I have some sympathy towards Van Frazen's idea about explanation, meaning that it's heavily depends upon pragmatics and agents' needs to explain something. So I guess that we can have the same elements of mosaic, but we might want to try to explain different aspects of this mosaic, right? So then we would have the same mosaic but different laws within, right? Because of this, right? So standards of goodness are basically, they're all about satisfying our explanatory needs, so to speak. Right?
So there won't be a single set of laws which is all of the dependence relations together.
Once again?
Sorry, there won't be like a single set of dependence relations given all together. There will be the set of grounding relations given separately from the set of causal relations.
Yeah.
Okay, so I misunderstood. I just kind of thought that we would have the all of the dependence relations of all the kinds given together.
No.
Right.
So this is dependence relation V1. Let's say it's grounding.
Okay, good.
Entailment and so on and so forth.
Thank you. That answers the question.
Other question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I had a question about the logical supervenience. It's just a clarificatory question. I wasn't quite sure what it meant for propositions to be the supervenience base.
Well, so there is this old argument between Wittgenstein and Russell, for instance, whether laws of logic are kind of a Humean or maybe they're more anti-Humean, so to speak. That is, whether laws of logic supervene on what is going on, or maybe what is going on is grounded or it's determined by laws of logic, so to speak, right? So in this sense, the idea is that the reason for which you believe in, let's say, law of non-contradiction is that this is the best description of this logical mosaic, right? So the mosaic of propositions and true values, or whatever your favorite element of entailment is, right? Whether these are sentences or whatever, right? So in this sense, we can think about, let's say, the world in terms of logic, metaphysics, physics, and so on and so forth. So when you're talking about laws of logic, you're talking about the logical aspect of the world, so to speak, right? That is, this is the world built out of true barriers and true values. and the best description of relations between them are just laws of logic.
Okay, thank you. Could I just follow up, please? What is a proposition?
Whatever your favorite notion of proposition is, actually. So, yeah, something that has true value, right? So this cup does not have a true value; it's an object. So surely not objects like that, right? So, yeah. So it's whatever. I mean, I don't have a view about that, so to speak, right?
Yeah, before you said that you think that truth making might be a good candidate for the universal
Yeah.
dependence relation. Can you say a little bit more about why you think that?
Well, so I think that the way in which we draw lines between different possible worlds and impossible worlds is based on what is true in a given world, right? So that's how we draw a distinction between different worlds. And I think that, to be able to talk about what is true in a given world, there needs to be something that makes a given sentence or proposition true within this world. So the mere fact that we can distinguish between world W1 and W2 is explained by the fact that there is a truth maker, that there are truth makers in these worlds, right? So but again, I would not want to die for that view, but it's the main motivation for this, I think.
So I thank our speaker.